Well, tonight, the title of my message is She Will Rise. She will rise. Every year, I pray about what the theme of next year's conference is going to be. So we actually, 8 months ago, knew what Echo 2025's theme was going to be, and we'll release what that is tomorrow. But when I was thinking about what this theme embodied, I wanted us to understand that it doesn't matter how many times we get knocked down in life. What matters is that we get up again. And it doesn't matter what happens to you. What matters is how you allow it to be used by God through you. And a few weeks ago, I was at Common Ground Park, and I was with my twins. I have 5-year-old twins, Justice and Adriana. And Adriana is a stubborn, unbelievably strong-willed little girl. I don't know where she gets it from. And we were at the rock wall at Common Ground Park, and Adriana was determined to climb the rock wall. Now, poor Adriana has this incredibly athletic brother. I mean, he's literally more athletic than me. He can do things that I'm like, how do you do that? Like, I'll try and make a shot, and he just makes it, and I can't make it no matter how many times I try. He's just very athletic. So Adriana sees her twin brother do things, and she just assumes, I'm 5, he's 5. We're born at the exact same moment. Surely I can do the same thing. So Justice scurries up this rock wall like it's nothing, and Adriana can't get up the wall. And she tried again and again and again, to the point, literally, her knees are bleeding because she has fallen down this rock wall so many times. And I'm looking at her and I'm going, Adriana, like, let's go over here. Let's do this activity. Let's try something else, like anything else, because I am not going to continue to watch you fall down this rock wall. But I watched her determination at about time 24. She climbed up the rock wall, and she did it. And I watched her standing at the top of the rock wall with both arms lifted going, Mommy, look, I did it. And I was like, you're right, baby girl, getting everybody's attention at Common Ground. Let's give it up for my daughter. Everybody, look, she did it. She did it. Now, here's the reality is getting knocked down in life is a given, but getting up is a choice. And we're all going to get knocked down at times. We're all going to experience situations and circumstances that are outside of our control that we wish did not happen. But we have a choice as to whether or not we stay down where we're knocked down or we get up and watch what can happen to us. And I don't know what you came here tonight facing. I don't know what has knocked you down specifically. If it is a mental health battle that you have been challenged by for years, if it is a physical diagnosis or ailment that you have been plagued by for years, if it is financial turmoil or relational heartbreak, whatever situation you came in here tonight facing that has knocked you down, I'm here to tell you that you're going to rise again. And no matter what has knocked you down, and no matter how far down you feel and how impossible it feels to get up, you will get up again. And there's 3 reasons why I find that most often we don't get up again. 1, it's too hard to get back up again, so we quit. We find that it's too hard, and so we go, I'm just not going to do it. It takes too long to get back up again, so we give up. It takes too long, it's too hard, or we don't see results quickly enough, so we don't keep going. We don't see the results we want as fast as we want them, and so we give up, we stop, and we don't keep going. And I think most often in my years of psychological evaluation, my years of mental health work, my years of teaching psychology, I have found that there's kind of 3 types of people when it comes to getting up or not. 1, many in this room have fallen down and you've chosen to stay down. This is the majority of people because we get beat down in life, we get knocked down, and so we decide, I'm just going to stay down. Another one is that we got up, but not to the level that we could because we're comfortable where we are. We like being in control, and we like the level that we have achieved on our own, and so we stay right there. Or we get up in our own strength and don't develop a dependence on God. And we can tell this because when life shakes you, because life is going to shake all of us, there's a difference between a person who is shaken and a person who is shook. Life is going to shake all of us, but whether or not it actually shakes you to your core is up to you. And so no matter where you're at today, if you find yourself at rock bottom or at the top of the mountain, we all have another level to achieve. And we all have another place we can go, and we all have another risen level we can attain, no matter where we find ourselves at. And there's a story, an incredible story, that is written about in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And I'm going to read tonight specifically from the book of Luke in chapter 8. And so if you have your Bible, you can turn there. But I'm going to read specifically a story, and I want to set up what this story is about, because this is a story about a 12-year-old little girl. And this 12-year-old little girl is dying. And her father is a religious leader. He's a synagogue leader. And he sees his dying 12-year-old daughter, and he races to where he hears Jesus is going to be to beg Jesus to heal his daughter. Now, it's incredible, in all three gospel accounts of this story of Jairus' daughter is actually an interruption of the story of the woman with the issue of blood. You've heard me talk about the woman with the issue of blood. If you've been to Echo Conference, you've heard me talk about this story. This story bookends the story of the woman with the issue with blood. And Jairus knows his daughter is near death, knows who the healer is, and races to who Jesus is, knowing he's the only one who has the power to actually save her. And so here's what happens in Luke chapter 8, verses 40 to 42, and then 49 to 55. It says, now when Jesus returned, a crowd welcomed him, for they were all expecting him. Then a man named Jairus, the synagogue leader, came and fell at Jesus' feet, pleading with him to come to his house, because his only daughter, a child about 12, was dying. While Jesus was still speaking, someone came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. Your daughter is dead. Don't bother the teacher anymore. Hearing this, Jesus said to Jairus, don't be afraid, just believe, and she will be healed. When he arrived at the house of Jairus, he did not let anyone go in with him except Peter, John, and James, and the child's father and mother. Meanwhile, all the people were wailing and mourning for her. Stop wailing, Jesus said. She is not dead, but asleep. They laughed at him, knowing she's dead. But he took her by the hand and said, my child, get up. Her spirit returned, and at once she stood up. Then Jesus told them to give her something to eat. Let's pray. Jesus, we thank you for the opportunity we have to be in your word tonight. Lord, I pray the words that are of me would fall to the floor, and the words that are of you, Jesus, would pierce our hearts. God, I pray that you would show us every area of our life where we need to rise. In your name, Jesus, I pray. Amen. Here's the point I want us to all understand tonight, is the facts aren't always final. The facts aren't always final. You see, this girl was pronounced dead, but she wasn't dead. The facts aren't always final. And Jesus gives us some clear steps for how to keep the faith amid whatever the facts are. Number one, Jesus tells us to just believe. Just believe. It says, when the crowd welcomed him, for they were all expecting him, the man called Jairus, the synagogue leader, came and fell at Jesus' feet, pleading with him to come to his house because his only daughter, a girl about 12, was dying. While Jesus was still speaking, someone came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. Your daughter is dead, he said. Don't bother the teacher anymore. Hearing this, Jesus said to Jairus, don't be afraid, just believe, and she will be healed. Here we see two commands and a promise. Two commands and a promise. Jesus says, don't be afraid, just believe, and she will be healed. Now, it's important to understand that Jairus was a nobleman. He was a religious leader, a synagogue leader, which means he had an elevated position of importance in this area. So for him to lower himself by throwing himself onto the ground was an act of desperation. Because anybody with any kind of pomp and circumstance would never dirty themselves by throwing themselves onto a dirt ground floor in order to request anything. And certain situations can make your position irrelevant. His position was one of prominence, but his situation was one of desperation. And so Jairus throws himself at the feet of Jesus. And first of all, we need to take note that he went to Jesus. He didn't wait for Jesus to come to him. He was a nobleman, so he could have sent a servant. He could have sent someone to go get Jesus. Instead, he was so desperate, he went to Jesus himself. And he didn't wait for Jesus to come to him. He didn't wait for someone to bring Jesus to him. He went to the healer himself. And I think some of us are sitting around waiting for Jesus to come to us, and he's waiting for you to come to him. And rather than sitting around and waiting for our healing, what are we doing to go and get it? Jairus goes to the healer, knowing that just because he had a position of prominence, it didn't change his situation. So he lowers himself at the feet of Jesus when he's delayed by the woman with the issue of blood. Now, get a picture here, okay? Jairus leaves his sick, dying daughter. Now, if you're a mom in the house, you know when your child is sick, it is almost impossible to leave them. He leaves his sick child, goes to Jesus, and the translations here say that the crowd was pressing in so much so, one gospel account says it almost crushed them. And so the crowd's pushing around, and Jairus is going, please, Jesus, please, Jesus. And Jesus says, yes, I will go. But when they're on their way, they encounter an interruption. They encounter a disruption. See, Jairus had his plan, and Jesus was interrupted. He stops to provide for a non-fatal condition, the woman with the issue of blood, and while doing so, Jairus' daughter dies. The woman's deliverance became his greatest disappointment. The other woman's issue that distracted in that moment became his greatest disappointment and devastation. Imagine the heartache of a father who you finally get to Jesus, the healer. You get him to agree to come to your home. Jesus says he's going to go, and then another person comes and gets your healing. Imagine how Jairus must have felt watching another woman who suffered with an issue of blood for 12 years when his 12-year-old daughter was dying. Some of us have seen Jesus doing a healing work in other people's lives, and we're wondering where ours is. And we become angry, and we become bitter, we become frustrated because we see what Jesus is doing in the life of another instead of appreciating that Jesus has enough healing to go around. He doesn't have a limit on how much he can do. There is no cap on what he's able to accomplish. He doesn't ration out his miracles. He has enough for everyone. But imagine the human flesh of Jairus watching this other woman get healed when his daughter is at home dying. When someone from Jairus' house brings him bad news, it says, don't bother the teacher. First of all, I want us to hear this. Jesus is never bothered by our problems. Man says Jesus is bothered by our problems, but Jesus never allows anyone to be bothered by our problems. He is never bothered by whatever you bring to the feet of Jesus. He appreciates every single thing we bring to him. But a man says from Jairus' house, don't bother the teacher. Now, it's interesting that they call him teacher. You see, we know who Jesus is today, but remember, this is pre-cross. This person who came from the house of Jairus is still making up his mind about Jesus. He doesn't know who Jesus is. He knows he's a healer, but he doesn't know he's the healer. He knows he's had miracles accompany him, but he's still making up his mind. So listen to this. He calls him teacher. He's limiting him by calling him teacher. When he's Messiah, Savior, he limits him by calling him teacher. He says, teacher cannot be bothered. Sometimes we do hear lies, but I think most often we hear limitations. We'll hear the lies, but most often we hear the limitations. We hear the questions. We hear the wonder. Instead of she will rise, we hear, will she rise? We hear a limitation and a question mark where there is also meant to be an exclamation point and a period on who Jesus says you are and who he's called you to be. It's not a question of she will rise. It's just a matter of time of when she gets up. Calls her teacher and says, don't bother coming, she's dead. You see, they thought Jesus could help if she was sick, but they didn't think Jesus could help if she was dead. Now, Jesus knows his power, and so he's not concerned about taking a moment for the woman with the issue of blood, knowing full well he can still go provide for the woman who just died, for this little 12-year-old girl who has just died. He's not concerned, but humankind, mankind is concerned. Jesus knew that was just a setup for her comeback. He knew that this moment was an opportunity for her to just be raised from the dead. And so he's not bothered. He's never too late. He's always on time. It doesn't matter what someone says about your miracle that you're waiting for. It doesn't matter that they say you're too old or you're too far gone or you can't do it or you're uneducated enough or you don't have the money or you don't have the status or you don't have the whatever. It doesn't matter what anybody says. It doesn't matter what some question somebody puts in your mind. Stop placing limitations on a limitless God. He doesn't have limits. So we don't need to walk in any of those limitations. But here's the reality. I can't enjoy his provision waiting for my preferences. We all have a way we want to get our miracle, and that's not the way God wants to give it to us. We can't enjoy the provision of God waiting for our preferences. I love this line. It says, hearing this. So Jesus hears this. The word there is parakousos, which in Greek means to ignore. So Jesus hears someone from the house of Jairus say, don't bother the teacher, your daughter's dead. Which, first of all, who does that? What kind of friend, races to you? Hey, it's not worth it anymore. Give it up. She's already gone. That's terrible. But Jesus hears this, and that word there says he ignored it. And then he tells Jairus, which we have no indication from the text that Jairus didn't believe, but he tells Jairus, knowing the human response, he says, just believe. In other words, ignore the lie, ignore the limitation, don't listen to what the naysayers are going to say. You see, Jairus couldn't control what happened to him, but he could control how he responded. We don't control what happens to us, but we do control how we respond. And so what happens to him gets through him, and the miracle is birthed by belief. His miracle is birthed by his belief. That's why Jesus says, just believe. He's taking him on a journey of faith. It doesn't say your daughter is healed. It says your daughter will be healed. He's asking Jairus to trust him. He's asking Jairus to go on a journey with him to believe for his 12-year-old's resurrection, to believe for a supernatural healing and a supernatural encounter. And I wonder how many of us tonight, Jesus is saying, just believe. One of the things that's interesting about the African impala is it can leap 30 feet and it can jump 10 feet high. I know way too much about the impala because I have ridden the safari ride at Animal Kingdom way too many times. It can leap 30 feet and jump 10 feet high. And yet, if you've ever noticed, that ride only has a 3-foot enclosure. How does the African impala that can leap 30 feet and jump 10 feet high stay within a 3-foot enclosure all the days of its life? Well, what we know about the African impala is it will not leap unless it sees where it can land. So that impala, while it can go 30 feet in distance and jump 10 feet high, it will never test its limits if it doesn't see where it can land. How many of us, we're meant to go 30 feet, we're meant to go 10 feet, but we won't travel 3 because we're afraid of where we're gonna land. And I wonder if some of us would stop believing that the facts are final and start believing what God could do in and through us if we just trusted a little bit more. Number 2, stop wailing. I love that Jesus says that. He literally says, stop wailing. Oh, how embarrassing to be the person that he says that to. Verses 51 and 52, it says, when he arrived at the house of Jairus, he did not let anyone go in with him except Peter, John, and James, and the child's father and mother. Meanwhile, all the people were wailing and mourning, which is an understandable response. And yet, Jesus says, stop wailing. She is not dead, she is asleep. Now, here's the first thing I want us to notice here. Jesus handpicked who got to witness the miracle. He hand-selected who he got to display his power to. Some of us, we need to distance the doubters. We need to remove ourselves from some of the people who are wailing louder than our worship. Some of the people who are putting question marks where God intended for there to be a period. They're putting question marks in your own mind, making you wonder and doubt how high you can go, how far you can go. Instead of listening to the doubters, why don't we distance ourselves from some of the doubters? Jesus handpicks who gets to see the miracle. I remember as a young girl, I got to spend some time with my grandmother. And it was when I was serving with the Miss America organization, and I was Miss Alaska, and I was living with my grandmother. And I remember talking to her about some of the doubters, some of the people that were saying some mean things or just not being the kindest. And I love, this is what my grandmother said. She said to me, if people are doubting how far you can go so far you can't hear them anymore. And I went, Ani, mic drop. If people are doubting how far you can go so far you can't hear them anymore. Stop allowing the doubters to dictate your destiny. Put your trust in Jesus, not the crowd. Stop listening to what the masses have to say. The masses are not the one that has an authority in our lives. But not everyone gets to witness the rise. Not everyone should be invited into your circle of the innermost. Jesus had his disciples, he had the masses, and yet he chose 3, as well as the child's parents, to come in to witness the miracle. You don't need a crowd, but you do need a couple. You do need a couple people to believe in your dream with you, to believe in your power with you, to believe for your healing with you. You don't need a crowd, but you do need a couple. Now, what's interesting here is at this time and place in history, they had to hire professional mourners. So the Jewish tradition of this time required even the poorest of people to hire 2 flute players and 1 wailing woman. For real, that was her job, was to be a wailing woman, which meant she would pound her chest and literally wail. That was her sole source of income. I'm like, what kind of job is that? Now, this was the customary tradition at a Jewish wake. They were literally hired people to wail. Now, wailing is any kind of negativity, complaining, screeching, like, you know what the wailers are in your life, right? Like, they're just the people that are like, the glass is always half empty, it's never half full. They're the people that put the doubt in your mind, the people that make you question. And so Jesus says, stop the wailing. We don't need more wailers, we need more of Jesus. He says, stop the wailing. And maybe you're in this room and you found yourself a professional wailer. You found yourself one of those people that's just constantly negative, constantly having something bad to say. It's never too late to be who you might have been. We don't have to continue down one path just because that's the way we've always gone. There's an opportunity for change every single day. Just because that's who you've been doesn't mean it's who you have to be. And I used to say this all the time to clients. When I blame others, I lose my power to change. When I blame others for who I am, I lose my power to change. Stop giving your power away. That power is meant for you to carry it within yourself. Stop giving your power away. Jesus says she's not dead, she's just sleeping. Things aren't always as they seem. When I was in 7th grade, I was homeschooled. And every day, as I sat at our dining room table, which had a sliding glass door that looked out at the bird feeder. We lived in a single wide trailer and not even a double wide. We couldn't afford the double wide. So the double wide trailer, you people are lucky. We had a single wide. And I sat at the dining room table where I'd do my homework and I could look out and I could see this bird feeder. And at this bird feeder was this darn squirrel that every single day would eat all of the bird's food. And so every time I saw the squirrel, I kept a loaded BB gun right by the sliding glass door. Guys, I grew up in Alaska. There was a gun in every room of my home, so don't judge me. I would grab my BB gun, I would load it up, and I would shoot at this squirrel, literally every single day. And every single day, I missed. And I was actually a fairly decent shot, but every day I missed. And it was like this squirrel was tormenting me. Every day I would hear him like, every day. And every day I would grab that BB gun and I could not get any work done. Like I couldn't get my math done, I couldn't get my science done, I couldn't get my English done because this stupid squirrel was tormenting me. And so one day I was like, this is it, this is my day, it is final, I'm taking this squirrel out. So I'm sitting at the table and I'm waiting, I'm listening, and I see that squirrel, and sure enough, he rolls on up, this little glass bird feeder, and he sits on the ledge of that bird feeder eating all the bird seed. So I bring my BB gun out and I aim, and as God would have it, I shot that sucker and he dropped to the ground. And I was like Adriana on the top of the Common Ground Park. I did it! I did it! I did it! And my sisters, who were also homeschooled, did not care. They had no concern for my victory. And so I grabbed my snow boots and I put them on, wearing shorts in 20-degree below zero weather, brought my BB gun, put it on my shoulder, and I walked out there to claim my prize like any good Alaskan. I was gonna skin that sucker and put it up on my wall. And I walk out there to grab that dead squirrel. When it did, have you ever seen one of those, like, they hop up? That stupid squirrel hopped on up, sat on its little hind legs and went, hee 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 hee, and ran away. That squirrel has tormented me every single day since then. Things are not always as they seem. I thought for certain I had taken that squirrel out, and when I walked up on that squirrel, it was not dead. It was tormenting me. It was teasing me. I literally think that squirrel was sent straight from hell to torment me. But here's the reality. When Jesus is saying, stop wailing, sometimes we have to experience some temporary loss for long-term gain. He's telling Jairus to trust him, just believe, and not be afraid. Some temporary loss for some long-term gain. Short-term pain always produces long-term power. Short-term pain will always produce long-term power, but sometimes you got to be knocked down lower than you've ever been before to stand taller than you've ever been. And you have to trust Jesus, not be afraid, believe, and stop wailing. The pain is temporary, but quitting, that's forever. There's this psychological phenomenon that I teach about, and it's called the quiet quit. It's a newer concept that has been developed where people will go to work and they'll show up and they'll do just enough work to not get fired. But it's called the quiet quit because internally, they've given up. Mentally, they've quit. Mentally, they've checked out. And I wonder how many of us, we don't even have the energy to wail anymore because we've checked out of our marriage. We've checked out of our workplace. We've checked out of our family. We've checked out of our commitments. We've checked out of our sobriety. We've checked out of our mental health battle. We've had a quiet quit, and we've succumbed rather than fighting to achieve the rise that Jesus has for every single one of us because we've allowed for the quiet quit to succumb in our minds. And I want to encourage you tonight, it's not done. It's not over. It doesn't matter how much you've quit. God has more in store. Number 3, I'm going to invite the team to come up, and I want to close with a couple of thoughts. Verse 53 and 55, it says, they laughed at him, knowing she was dead. Now think about that. They laughed at Jesus. They laughed at him, knowing she was dead. But he took her by the hand and said, my child, get up. Her spirit returned, and at once she stood up. Then Jesus told them to give her something to eat. It's interesting to me that these professional wailers, their mourning turned to mocking. They were hired to mourn, and their mourning turned into mocking. So Jesus shows up to do a miracle, and the people laugh. And that laughter removed them from the opportunity to see the miracle. How many of us have had somebody laugh at what we've said we're believing Jesus to do in our lives? We got to distance the doubters and you separate yourself from the laughter. They laughed at him knowing that she was dead, laughed at Jesus, even though they knew he had been performing miracles and he had already raised one other person from the dead. They laughed at him. How quickly we forget the faithfulness of Jesus. How quickly we forget the miracles of Jesus. How quickly we forget the faithfulness of Jesus. See, Jesus walked into the room where the sick girl lay, and he took her by the hand, which, keep in mind, because of the ceremonial rite of that time, he was violating custom by touching anyone who is dead. He was violating Jewish custom. So he grabs her by the hand, touches a dead girl, violating all of the customs of the land, and he says to her, "My child, get up." He identifies with her. My child. Takes ownership, calling her, my child, get up. See, we gotta forget the facts and forge forward in faith, trusting that Jesus, who tells us in his own words how to rise, to just believe, to not be afraid, to stop wailing, and then third, to get up. To get up. Jesus says here, my child, get up. You see, I understand you may have done what you did. You may be who you are. Maybe you are where you are for a reason. The facts are the facts. I can't change the facts, but the facts aren't final. So you may find yourself in a place tonight where you're going, Christina, it's hopeless. The facts are the facts. Jairus, had he succumbed to the facts, would not have seen a miracle in his daughter being raised from the dead. And what's amazing to me is that Jairus asked for his sick daughter to be healed, but he got so much more. All he was asking for was the sickness to be healed. And instead, his dead daughter got raised from the dead. He got so much more than he asked for. That interruption of the woman with the issue of blood proved to provide a greater portion and blessing than he could have ever imagined. It's worth the wait. It's worth the wait. It's worth the inconvenience. It's worth the interruption. It's worth the disruption. It's worth whatever time it takes to get to your place of miracle and blessing. But you have to continue to get up. That no matter how many times you get knocked down again, you've got to stand tall and say, the facts aren't final. And it doesn't matter how hard I get knocked down or how many times I get knocked down. I'm going to keep getting up. And when I do get up, I'm going to stand and testify to the goodness and the favor of the God I serve. And I'm going to put all of hell on notice. And I'm going to put the world on notice that greater is he who is in me than anything in this world that's going to try and knock me down and take me out. The facts aren't always final. Number of years ago, I was standing in a women's conference just like this. And Andrew and I had been dealing with years of facts. The fact of infertility. And I had been told by multiple doctors, we have no idea why you're not able to conceive. Almost a decade of infertility. And we had tried everything known to mankind at that point. IUIs, IVF, adoption, private adoption for 3 years, fostered a little girl. I remember on August 1st, 2017, getting the worst phone call of my life and told that the little girl that we had believed was ours, we had lost forever. And the judge was going to give the biological mom a 10th try. She had lost 9 other biological children, and she was lucky number 10. And I remember looking at my husband and going, the facts. We've tried everything, literally everything, and I still can't lose this desire and this urge to be a mom. And I was so fed up and so annoyed and so angry and so bitter, and boy, was I wailing. And my husband looked at me, and I'll never forget, he said, you're enough. If we never have a child, you're enough, and our marriage is enough. And that following year, I was at a women's conference just like this. And the pastor gave an opportunity to stand up. If you were believing for a miracle, for infertility to turn into fertility. And I remember standing in a room exactly like this in an atmosphere of faith and deciding, even though everything I had tried had failed, I'm going to get up one more time again. And I stood in a room of thousands, embarrassed, because at this point I was 36 years old and geriatric. Literally, my chart said geriatric. You're laughing, but it literally said that. It also said advanced maternal age, which is like not what you want to tell an older woman who's believing for children. But something happened that final time I stood up, and God did something. God, who is the author of life, did something in my womb that does not make sense still to this day. And the following year, we welcomed twins, Justice and Adriana. The facts aren't always final. The facts didn't look like anything was going to come of it. The facts looked bleak. The facts looked dead and done and gone. And I stand here before you today, the proud mother of a double portion of blessing, because the facts aren't always final. And hear me say this. Sometimes people get it twisted and they look at my life and they go, oh, she must have had everything easy. She must have had everything handed to her. Hear me when I say this. This message is the message of my life. She will rise is the message of my life, because you're looking at a little girl who was abused at a child age that you should have never experienced the hands of abuse. You're looking at somebody who had an eating disorder that should have taken my life, and instead I stand before you healed and whole. You're looking at somebody who is diagnosed with a major depressive disorder, and I know what it feels like to want to kill yourself. I know what it feels like to want to take your own life, and I stand before you with more joy than I've ever known what to do with before in my entire life, because the facts are not final.